Well, I told everybody that this next few weeks are going to be a roller coaster in the markets, and it really did live it up to that. And probably a good place to start is going to be with NVIDIA, who reported their earnings this week. And I haven't been talking too much about earnings because I try to look bigger picture of what's going on, but I just thought it was such an unusual day. So taking a look at NVIDIA's stock here, it was they reported earnings Wednesday, and I watched this thing go up. It was up. After hours, it was up. I think up to 515 or something like that. And then the next day it opened. I really thought that might lift the markets a bit because they reported such incredible earnings, but it didn't happen that way. And as you can see, we started way up here when the markets opened, and by the time we closed, we were about where we started. So this big 50-point move that happened overnight dissipated during the day, and then even today it continued down, and it was just kind of a shock to the market in general. And you can see, as we look at some of the other indices, you look at the Dow Jones, same thing, and it went back down. And this is kind of my line in the sand. So when we got down here, I was getting a little concerned. This is where I say, time to pack it in, boys. We're in a bear market down here around 33.6. Now, somebody may disagree with that, and they're welcome to. Now, we recovered fairly nicely today, and then when you look at the weekly, we were down for the week, but we ended right where I said, this is a good turnaround point, even though we broke through it a bit. So for the week, came back down, higher low. We still have this higher high here, so this pattern still is intact, and I'm curious to see what happens this coming week. Now, I'm going to talk about the SPY a little bit more at the end. These are 18 and 40 moving averages, and they'll move with each of the time frames that I'm looking at. So if I look at a monthly, that would be 18 and 40 monthlies, 18, 40 weeklies, and so forth. And it will fit into my narrative at the end. So, and I think it gives great perspective. I got this information from a guy named Joe Rabil. He has a channel on here, and I'll put a link below about his channel. But just continuing the conversation, here we go with NVIDIA, obviously a part of all of the tech, went down. We recovered fairly nicely today, but that is one big bearish engulfing candle. So do we continue down to say 431 on the SPY? Do we break that and continue to go lower? Those will be some questions we'll start to have a conversation with that in my final comments. Then we'll look at the Qs. Kind of the same thing, whether we keep this trend line. It's got still a little room to move down off of this trend line, but you can tell we're below the 18 and 40 here. And then the IWM, we're just kind of jumping around all over here. And I think for the week it slightly down, but we're right on this trend line here that we've had. We broke through it. I thought maybe we'd come down and hit the support here, but it wound up not going all the way down there and found some support around 181, and that's the Russell. We look at the 10-year yield. I've been watching this thing. We thought we might break through it. We broke through it a little bit this week, but for the most part, it's still kind of stayed in this red zone I've kind of mapped out here. And as long as we stay below, say 4.33 in closings, then I'm going to, for the week, then, the battle between Peter Schiff and David Hunter still remains. Nobody won this week. I mean, it was down overall for the week, but it went through the top briefly, and penetrated that. But, over, I think it was 4.35% or something like that, 4.362% it got up to for the high in the yield for the 10-year. And, David Hunter is expecting this thing to return down, and Peter Schiff's expecting this thing to continue on up from where we stand today. So, indecision still. There is no winner or loser in this yet. But looking at the indices, maybe Peter Schiff waiting for this to break. He's certainly closer than where David Hunter, I think, would expect these numbers to have been this week. But then we had the dollar, which David Hunter's waiting to roll over. It didn't. We continued for the week, continued this climb on these weekly data, and then crude oil was down for the week, so maybe we're starting to roll down, and that would certainly help inflation. But I have a feeling the numbers, and we'll talk about the economic numbers for next week. We have the PCE coming up, and then the VIX was down today. We had went up to this 40 SMA on the weekly, and let's take a look at the daily here. We still remain above it from that standpoint. And don't worry about these. We'll talk about this at the end. We already talked about NVIDIA. We did not broaden out the market, kind of ended towards these lows that we've had over the last 6 days. So there we sit. Go down and fill this. I don't know. Well, what else do we have here? The economic calendar. So this week, there wasn't a lot. I mean, there were a bunch of speeches, and I don't remember anything significant coming out of it. We had the existing home sales were down 2.2%, which is a little better than the previous month over month, but not as good as expected, was 0.5% decline. The 30-year went up. I'm anticipating that next Wednesday we'll probably have about the same, unless we have a big turnaround Monday and Tuesday. PMI came in weaker than expected, and we're starting to see maybe a little weakness in the services portion. Manufacturing got weaker by another 2.3 points, 2 points lower than the last period. So that should be, especially if services starts to contract and that would be under 50, then we probably see the Fed start to back off a little bit. That would certainly be one of the things that they would look at. And then new home sales actually beat the forecast of minus 1.6%. So I don't know how they're doing. They must be doing it with smoke and mirrors. It was up, everything, the new home sales portion, because anytime you see rates go up like that, there must be some special deals going on in order to get these houses sold. And they could be maybe these smaller houses that they're building now. Thursday or yesterday, the durable goods orders were down by 5.2%. That's almost 9.6, almost 10 points lower on durable goods month over month. And initial jobless claims came a little bit lighter than the expectation of 240. So that was really other than Michigan's consumer sentiment came down a little bit. Lower, 69.5, and that was lower than what the consensus was, lower than the previous period. Powell didn't say a whole bunch today, other than saying we're going to, you know, continue to look at raising rates and those types of things. They may. I think if there's one more, I think they've already killed the economy. There is not going to be a soft landing on the economy. That's my expectation anyway. Looking for the next week, we have the Dallas Manufacturing Index, which has been weak for quite a while. We also have the JOLTS job openings. Doesn't really move the market that much typically. The Consumer Board Consumer Confidence expected to be down just a little bit. And then obviously Wednesday they'll report the 30-year mortgage rate and pending home sales. That potentially can be a slight market mover, but the big thing is going to be next week is going to be core PCE. And I think it's going to tick up, so I don't know how the markets are going to react. With that, the expectation would be that it would, and we'll take a look at Truflation here after we go through sentiment. Then we'll, what else do we have here? We have on Friday, we'll have non-farm payrolls, the unemployment rate. We have ISM manufacturing PMI. Continue to see if that continues its downtrend. So yeah, that's the calendar for really the next week or so. Take a look at the investor sentiment. I would be curious to see what this was if they've done this on Thursday night rather than Wednesday night after that NVDA U-turn that happened. But you can see sentiment is, and this is 6 months. For the next 6 months, expectation is very bearish, 35.9%, 32.3% bullish. And you can see we're definitely increasing the number of bears and decreasing the number of bulls, and the bears for the expectation of the next 6 months now exceeds the bulls. So people are getting more negative. And fear and greed index, it had dipped into fear yesterday with about 43 here, and you can see kind of the timeline. But this is something that, has this gone far enough for us to make our way up? Is this thing going to get slammed down a little bit more? Next week will be very telling. Curious to see how the market moves without any real motivators until we get to PCE on Thursday, and then the non-farm payroll on Friday. Those are certainly two market movers. Truflation. Like I said, it's ticked up. So my expectation is at the moment that when they report that PCE, it's going to be a little bit hotter, and then the markets may turn negative because of the expectation that the Fed will raise. So that's kind of a look at both the market and the economics. Now, one of the things I wanted to do is Joe Rabil, who I came across online, interesting way to look at things, is, I've always tried to give people perspective on what's happening bigger picture, so that people get very panicked, especially when you look at something like, maybe we'll even look at the 1 minute, reset the chart view. I mean, it's just type of thing. But when you look at the monthly data, Joe Rabil basically uses two indicators, the MACD and the ADX, and he uses the RSI a little bit. And these are momentum indicators for the most part. I've used the MACD a little bit before. I'm going to kind of go back to it. I use primarily the RSI, but I like the idea of these momentum indicators. And so what you have here is when you have high momentum going on something, then you've got the momentum of buyers in the green here and sellers in the red. And by month you can see that for when we started our little bit of downturn here back in looking at the monthly back in January, we had our bear market, and now we've recovered. Is it over? Well, we're still in this month, so this could either go down more or it could make its way back up. So we'll have to wait and see. But the momentum indicator basically says, hey, not a lot of momentum going right now. It's down around 16, and there are still more buyers than sellers for the month, even though it's gone down. And the MACD's cross back over. Once we paint the new one for August next week, when the month ends, we'll take another look and see what that looks like. But with another week to go, markets could go up. Taking a look at the weekly, it kind of gives you some perspective again too. I mean, there's still got some momentum that was gathered because we still had a lot more buyers over sellers in the gap, and the momentum behind it is keeping what is that, 39, 40-ish here. Anything above 25, I don't know if you can see this dotted line here, but roughly 25, Joe Rabil says that's got good momentum behind it still. So the momentum hasn't been hasn't caused the indicators to go back under 25 at this point on the weekly. We take a look at the daily, and we see a little bit different picture. We see our 18 and 40 here, which he uses, and we see a little bit of flattening out now in the MACD, but we still have the MACD line under the signal line here, and then we have if that crosses back over, then start to make our U-turn back up. But here we certainly have more momentum in the daily chart here of sellers over buyers, but again, we're down around 13 on that momentum indicator, whereas we're up around 50 when things were going up, and now this works both ways. So if this was a real strong, we had a lot of real strong sellers, this thing would go up, because it's basically the difference between the number of sellers and buyers. So there's not a whole lot of momentum on the daily. So can it recover? Yeah. He looked at and again, I'll put a link to him talking about this, but he's basically saying, we get back over this high here, let's say next week of 445, then all these other indicators will be certainly more bullish looking. We did have a cross here, it looks like, barely on the MACD. And it's an interesting method that he has to use these momentum indicators, the way that he trades. It's probably worth a look for you if you want to educate yourself on looking at different ways to be able to trade. So those are my final comments. It was a very interesting week. It's the expectation I had. I put the roller coaster on the thumbnail, that things are going to be really up and down. You look at these candles; they're very big. You got long tails. I mean, you've got a whole bunch going on, but with regards to the markets, and I again, fasten your seatbelt. This would probably be the wise thing to say to people at this point. And there is, at this point, no winner between Peter Schiff and David Hunter. And at different times this week, if you'd asked me probably Wednesday, I would have said, oh, David Hunter is looking pretty good. Then Thursday comes around, NVDA shoots up, and then collapses during the day. It was an incredible thing to watch. I mean, it was especially with the amount of earnings that NVIDIA had. They were $2 billion over in sales from 11, I think like 13 billion were their sales, and I think their dividend or their earnings per share were 270, and I think the expectation was like 202. So and if you and looking at NVIDIA in general, I mean, the expectation for analysts is that it'll hit somewhere between 640 and 880 were kind of some of the guesses that people had on, somebody had 1100. So NVIDIA, now, here's what I would say. You look at a stock like in NVIDIA, you have really good competitors there. You got AMD, in that marketplace, and a number of others that aren't sitting on their hands while all this goes on. They can see that there's going to be a lot of money to be made. Now, it may take a quarter, 2 quarters, maybe even a year for them to bridge that gap, but I guarantee you they're making changes. And NVIDIA, ride the wave if you want. I think this price is, I don't know. It may be undervalued, maybe overvalued. It's hard to say, but somebody's saying 1100, and somebody saying 1100 on it. Could happen if in the next 2 couple of quarters, if they continue kind of the dominance over the AI chips that they have. So it's been a very interesting week watching how these stocks have performed. So anyway, that is what I wanted to cover this week, and especially the Joe Rabil stuff. I think is very interesting if you're looking at time frames and trying to okay, where's the momentum, and what does that mean from a monthly standpoint? What does it mean from a weekly standpoint? What does it mean for a daily standpoint? All the way to hourly is the way that he goes through it. And he seems to go through SPY quite often on his channel. So again, I'll put a link in that below. And really, that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there's always a better way.